When we have a good convention, it means the con committee has done a good job. They always work hard, so make sure you thank them if you have a chance. This was not paid for any political committee. Great. Are we on time to start? Should we start? Let's start.
You've already chased away Paolo.
Shut up. He's going for water because no flunky provided it for him. All that stuff I said about the con committee. Yeah. Okay. All right. This panel is entitled "Rules, Rules. There Are No Rules." You knew that, right? I'm Walter Hunt. I'm your host and moderator. Thank you. My most recent novel is Elements of Mind, which is about mesmerism, which I sent a copy of to Lawrence, and he thanked me.
Specify which Lawrence.
Lawrence Schoen. Oh, I'm sorry, Big Clock, the Klingon guy. Okay, I have a few introductory comments, but I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves briefly. Then I'll make comments, and then sparks will fly. Promise. Who wants to start? Which Lawrence wants to start? Start. Okay, Lawrence.
Okay, I'm Lawrence Watt Evans, author of many books. This is the most recent, Because Avenger, available as ebook, paper, audiobook, whatever you want. And also, mostly I write fantasy, occasional essays, stuff. And I have made a habit out of trying to do stuff you're not supposed to do, mostly in short stories, because it's easier to get away with it there. And I think that's why I'm on the panel, and I will now let my compatriots tell you about themselves.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
So I guess we're telling you why we're on this panel.
And who we are.
So I'm Alma Katsu. I'm the author of the Taker trilogy. The first book, The Taker, came out a few years ago, and if you've heard of any of the books, that's the one you heard of. It was kind of a big book, and it's been published in like 16 languages or something like that. But it's a trilogy. I think I'm on this panel because I managed to write a trilogy about immortality that has nothing to do with vampires or fairies or any of that stuff. And it's like a great love story. It's supposed to be like the greatest love story ever told, and yet it's an anti-romance. So I think I know a little bit about breaking the rules, or maybe I don't. Maybe I just delude myself. Anyway, that's why I'm here.
My name is Paolo Bacigalupi. I'm the guest of honor. I think you know me. Like, I don't know. I always feel weird, like, trying to do an introduction. Like, it's like, okay, I think I'm best known for The Wind-Up Girl, which was a Hugo and Nebula Award winner, and Shipbreaker, my young adult novel, which was a National Book Award finalist and a Michael L. Prince Award winner. I have, in terms of rules, I think most of the rules that I've been trying to break are all ones about what you're supposed to do with your career. Because I've been writing for adults, also for young adults, and now for middle grade, and sort of jumping around and following my passions, and hopefully not tanking my career at the same time.
Sounds good. James?
Oh, hi, James Morrow. Lately I've been writing great historical fiction, but in between those convulsions of research, I've been engaged in the therapeutic project of doing novellas for Tachyon. Shamli Hiroshima, which lost the Nebula, the Hugo, and the Locust Award. got the Theodore Sturgeon Memorial Award, and the Madonna and the Starship. They're both kind of loopy homages to popular culture. One's about an actor who's hired to portray Godzilla, and personifying a biological weapon that the U.S. Navy has developed and is ready to unleash on the Japanese in 1945, but they hope to leverage a surrender instead. So the actor has to give the performance of a lifetime. And this is my homage to 50s live television and the possibility that it might attract actual aliens to our planet with its rationalist message. 2015, is that the, yeah.
That'll be next year.
We'll see the publication. This is the ARC of Galapagos Regained. As I say, essentially straight historical fiction, but it does contain a subplot that's full of time-traveling characters from sort of flash forwards, I guess they call it. That's me.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Schoen, and I think the rule I'm breaking is that you can have a career in science fiction despite speaking Klingon. I'm the author of a series of stories and novels and novellas about a stage hypnotist in space.
In space.
And the other rule I'm breaking is the last 2 years I've written novellas in this series. They've been nominated for the Nebula and they keep losing. The new novella comes out next month. We're going for a triptych, so please nominate and then don't vote for it. And you know who you are. And in other rule breaking, after 20 years in the business, in obscure anthologies and small press, they tell me I'm about to be an overnight success. I have a novel coming out from Tor Books. Not till December of next year, so plenty of time for me to lose another Nebula.
Well, I should have mentioned, these books are actually here in the book room, which is not my normal.
So is mine. All right. I want to make a couple of introductory remarks. One self-serving and referencing a book that I've just come out with, and the other not. In the beginning of the narrative of Elements of Mind, which is told first person, my narrator chides himself that if he were an instructor would tell him not to tell the story the way he tells it. That in fact he doesn't start at the beginning and work his way to the end. He sort of starts at the end, jumps in the middle, works back to the beginning, and then goes forward. And that's really not the way stories are told. But he does it anyway, and it hopefully works. The other is that my daughter's a big fan of Doctor Who, and I've always sort of chided it because I believe it's fantasy. Dressing in drag is science fiction. It's really fantasy. And the problem with it is that anything goes all the time, and you can do whatever you want. And if you didn't do it two episodes ago, you can do it now, and you can break the rules. And that even though there's wonderful acting and storytelling, that the dramatic tension is always undercut by the fact that the author can do whatever he wants to save the Doctor's ass any way he wants to do it. So the question I would like to pose to the panel is it important that there be boundaries to what you can do? Or does that, in fact, stifle creativity? Should we be doing whatever we want? And do we have to be obliged? I mean, Lawrence Schoen and I have talked about this at great length, about how there are certain ways in which you have to satisfy the reader and satisfy yourself when you write a story. That you can't just do whatever you want, because that makes it Doctor Who-like, that anything can happen, and there's just sort of, if anything can happen, nothing is wonders. Who would like to jump in and respond to that?
Well, since you invoked me, I'll jump in. And then the rest of you can tell me I'm wrong.
We will.
Because
You're wrong.
Like that never gets old. I'm a big believer in the notion that the author has a contract with the writer, with the reader. That I'm going to tell you a satisfying story.
Time travel. It goes last.
No, that's parallel dimensions.
Right.
Parallel is you already had the contract with the reader.
Yeah, later.
And your grandfather left it to you in his will.
Before you killed him.
Before you killed him. Anyway, moving right along, not. You have certain expectations as the reader, and when those expectations are flouted, is that a word?
Yes, that's the
there
word.
we go. Thank you. Then it is an unsatisfactory experience. And the only exception to this I can think of is George R.R. Martin. But I swear, until that blade took off his head, I'm thinking, how's Ned getting out of this?
Okay. It's not actually true that you can't flout. It's not true that you can't flout reader expectations. The only time you can get away with flouting reader expectations is when you substitute something that makes them go, "Oh, cool!" Then you can surprise them any way you want. You don't have to follow expectations if you come up with something better.
That's the question. Is it any way you want, or is it a certain way is good and a certain way is bad?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to accept the, it was all a dream.
Oh, God.
And that fits your definition, but it still leaves the reader with a very unsatisfactory experience. But it's really good if you want to fling books across the room.
The reader won't say, "Oh, cool," when it turns out.
No,
Not so
the reader
much.
will not say, "Oh, cool." But I wrote a horror novel where
Oh, cool!
many years ago.
And you're wrong.
Where the plot ends with the monsters defeated temporarily and our hero deciding that he's not going to hunt down the surviving monsters. Screw that, he has a life to lead. And he goes out to California, but before he does, he hires a writer
to write the whole thing up and warn people the monsters are out there, and the writer he hires is Lawrence Watt Evans. And so this is kind of a cheat. It's not following the rules. I take a story that's been third person up to that point, and in the last chapter it's suddenly in first person by me.
Is this self-published? That would be
Oh,
really-
no.
Okay, that was
It was published by NAL back in 1990. But what was interesting is a lot of people thought that was really cool. One reviewer, on the other hand, I love this. The reviewer, John Betancourt, reviewed it for Twilight Zone and said that when he got to that last chapter, he threw the book across the room in disgust. A few years later, after the book had gone out of print, guess who bought the rights and reissued the book? John Betancourt and Wildside Press. And they've kept it in print ever since. Also, so some people hated the ending, but others loved it. I got, one night about 10 o'clock at night, I got a phone call from someone I had never heard of before, who was calling from somewhere in the woods of northern Saskatchewan to ask me if the story was true, because it had totally creeped him out.
No, but
I think that there's a question of like whether or not you're actually fulfilling your contract. You can twist almost anything, but you're still fulfilling a contract with the reader. And I think going, the twists, the surprises, the shocks, there tend to be, you tend to leave Easter eggs all along the way that say that this is actually, it might be surprising, but it's not impossible to the reader's mind that it's occurring. It doesn't feel like a cheat because it was actually earned with its setup. And I think going back to like the George R. R. Martin sort of example of, okay, here's Ned's head going on the block. What he does before then is you're expecting a certain narrative because we know that narratives are all about heroes, triumphing over impossible odds. But there's nothing in that story that says that good things happen to people. The wolf has already been killed. There's already plenty of things that say this is not a nice place.
That's not the problem with that scene for me. The problem is that
let me
Ned
finish.
keeps-
I'm going to finish, and then
He's
I'd
gonna
love
finish.
to share with that. Okay, I'm going to actually
I
finish
didn't
my
know we had
thought here.
finish.
I know it's terrible. But there's also, we've set up Joffrey as being a certain kind of a personality, so he's well defined.
and killed him too.
And so each of these things, though, as all these come together, when you say, "Oh my God," and you are shocked, but you're also like, "Of course, that's the way it goes," and it feels well earned, even as it feels like a twist and a betrayal of everything you sort of like want from an adventure story or an epic fantasy story. It still feels like a well-earned.
I don't think anybody threw, well, I don't think very many people threw the book across the room. Because they don't want to hurt their wall. Cause two foundations to it.
But I think it's actually a good example of adhering specifically to rules. That George R. R. Martin is adhering to the contract with the reader, where he says, "I have promised you nothing along the way here except for danger."
I agree. I think that's a very astute analysis and a really good example for aspiring writers in the room, right? Exactly how you set up a story that is going to break some rules. But one other thing, not that it's terribly deep, but you have to remember too, there's not just one reader. You can't just say you have a contract with the reader. There's a lot of readers, and some are going to get what you're doing and where you're going, and some are not.
Well, sure, but there are expectations. Books do get thrown across the room, and the reason is because
I would say probably every book gets thrown across the room by somebody.
What's the difference between your ideal reader hating you and your your reader with animosity?
Unless you're into that.
Some don't get
That's your
thrown
ideal
reader.
reader.
If
If
you
you've disappointed them,
some don't get thrown across the room because they put the reader to sleep instead, and that just gets dropped off the side of the chair.
And some never get finished, and sure. Now, but the whole idea of the sort of the meta story, that's a whole different category. My favorite meta story example, there's a mainstream novel called French Lieutenant's Woman, John Fowles, right? All right, remember the ending of the French Lieutenant's Woman, the book? Okay, he has two endings. One works out for the hero, and one doesn't. And how does he resolve? He goes into this whole thing about, well, I could show you two endings, and the one I show you first, you might get better. The one I show you second, you might remember. Which one do I put first? And he inserts himself into the railway car carriage and sits opposite the main character and flips a coin in the story. And that's how he resolves which one he tells first. That's as meta as you get, without hiring Lawrence Watt Evans to write the ending.
Now that's cool.
Now that's cool.
I think I would just have to do.
Yeah, no, please.
I guess I would dissent from the consensus. Therefore, it's not a consensus. I think the way I would define science fiction is it's the one genre in which there is no contract. And I think that's the value of science fiction.
Maybe there's a different sort of contract, but none at all.
No, I think it's
there is
you
a
set
contract.
sail on a worthy science fiction. I'm not
Do you
talking
have an
about
example
trash.
where you feel like that's an example of a story where you feel like that?
Yeah, almost everything that Tom Dish ever wrote. You know, there's no. If you go into it with expectations, he's constantly frustrated. You know, what is the one about everybody living in this apartment building? Is it called 333 or something? And like nothing changes, and the contract you normally sign is well, there's going to be something dynamic about the plot. There's going to be progress. Samuel R. Delaney, I think, signs no contract with the reader. I'm reading
If he did, you couldn't
his
understand it.
marvelous novella called Fellows, about a giant prick being removed from the statue of the nameless god. I have no idea where that's going. I'm in the middle of it.
I'm not convinced it goes anywhere.
And the pleasure of it for me is the sense that it's the contract of no contract. Without that willingness to break rules, there's no Kafka. And we do risk the Doctor Who malaise, and I agree with your diagnosis. When everything is possible, nothing is surprising.
Right, we said that in the earlier panel, and I ruthlessly stole it from you, sir.
Yeah.
No, I agree that there is the notion that we get wonderful literature and wonderful writing out of deliberately contravening what are perceived to be the rules. But the idea that there's no regulation of it at all strikes me as somewhat of a cheat. I think that it's a different sort of contract with a different sort of reader.
Well, if the writer knows what he or she is doing, then I don't
We're on
think
the panel.
by definition it's not a cheat. You want to write a time travel story and not deal with paradoxes. Okay, if you've got an agenda, if you've got a thing to say that's valuable or perhaps even true, it doesn't matter if you're indulging in time travel paradoxes or faster than light or any of those rule-bound notions of how the genre works.
There were no paradoxes in the time machine.
Sure. Well, I mean,
Indeed.
All right. Here's an example for you, which you might actually agree with. About most of Vonnegut, most of Kurt Vonnegut's work, which is nominally science fictional. Most of Kurt Vonnegut's work, which is nominally science fictional, there's the comment. It really doesn't. He doesn't care about how paradoxes come up. He's trying to fool with you. He's trying to change your expectation, which he constantly does.
With Vonnegut, you're signing up for his sensibility. You're reading those books for his voice.
Sure.
That's really what you're
That's part of
reading
the
almost
contract of
everything.
the Vonnegut.
And so the disappointment then would be Vonnegut doing something like Crichton.
Something like Vonnegut writing something like Breakfast of Champions, or Vonnegut writing something like Slapstick, where he loses it, where he doesn't care anymore.
Well, Breakfast of Champions was about finishing up and not doing that anymore. It was pictures of wide open beavers and pictures of assholes and American flags.
It's dreadful. Yeah, he should have workshopped it. Somebody said, Kurt,
So one of the things that's kind of interesting to me is that as a writer where you're experimenting, there are a number of things that you can get away with in the experimental set, and that other writers who appreciate craft or the details of the puzzles that you've created, they may appreciate it, but the general reader will feel resentful of that. As writers we get to play gods, and that's great. But there's this sort of thing is, are we bringing anyone along with us? And I think that's where you start seeing sort of what we call rules. It's like, I remember having this conversation with an agent at one point. He'd read my short stories, and he was like, these are really good. These are really, really good stories. He's like, you would think when you're working on a novel that you might want to leave a little hope for people at the end of the book. Because here's the thing, if you want to have this thing we call a career, you want people to come back and buy your next book.
Well, that's very
And,
pragmatic.
and here's the thing is, it's like, okay, you know, somebody can respect what you did. Oh, you wrote a devastating novel that devastated me in devastating ways. I won't sign up for the sequel, thank you so much. And I think that there's something, you know, it's like, you know, what you can do versus there are all sorts of other things that say, is that advisable to do? Is that a great, you know, what's the best path?
But there's still no rules. I'll defend the premise of the panel. I think of my colleague and sometime editor, Michael Kandel, who attempted his own literary career. And I remember saying, it might have been his first book, which was called Dealing with Dragons or something. But he had a completely pessimistic ending, where the protagonist loses his entire family in some kind of apocalypse, and all he gets at the end are inflatable family members.
That's like Vonnegut. That's it.
It's Vonnegut. And he stations them around the television set, and they all watch, pretend to be watching Ensemble, you know, a Doctor Who episode or something.
So it's a happy ending, is what you're saying.
It's a downer to a fare thee well, and the editor made him change it, and made him introduce a ray of hope.
Make you. The editor can do is say, "I'm not publishing this the way you did it."
My point is, that was the wrong advice from Michael Kandel. You know, he wasn't exactly sure. You know, you listen to your editor, but I think his career never took off, and
Because
I'm
it
not
lacked
sure.
the courage of its conviction.
Yeah, it's never recovered.
Well,
from
I
that
got
trauma.
a
I don't know. I mean,
criticism.
one of my novels, which I prefer not to specify which, when I submitted it to Del Rey Books way back when, they said, "Well, most of this is fine, but you show your hero dies at the end, and we can't have that happen. That readers will feel cheated." And I said, "Well, but that's how it ends." And she says, "Well, that we don't have to publish it." And basically, she said that, you know, okay, you don't have to show him live. You just have to not actually show him die on stage. And it's, I said, okay. So I changed it so you don't know whether he survived
Famous
or not.
last tricks. Yeah.
Which did really well, and what I thought was especially interesting is that meant that 5 years later I could write a sequel. Which I
In this
Kill
book,
him in the second book?
one of
Kill him
mine.
in the second book?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Did you kill
Did you kill him in the second book?
Oh, no. There's a third book plotted, which I still haven't written.
One of my
The
reviewers.
Reichenbach Falls syndrome.
Yeah, one of my reviews for this book said, you know, I liked it. It's written as a Victorian novel, as if written by a Victorian, and it actually
I did that.
It succeeds to a great extent that way. He said, well, you know, the problem is you'd sell a lot more books if you wrote it a little bit more so that other people could have it appeal to them, and it was a little bit more mainstream. And I said, okay, but that's not what I was trying to do. It's a Victorian era person, middle Victorian era person. Victorian era is very big, writing about something that happened during his lifetime in a way that they would have written about it then.
Right.
It's written like a
I did that and wound up having to self-publish it.
That's right.
I'm not arguing for narcissism exactly.
Damn.
I know that if I were to revisit my historical novel, The Last Witchfinder, the things about the voice I would change. You know, I'm not indulging in some
I love that.
notion of solipsism. Well, thank you.
Many did.
Yeah. But there was some of the rejections were all singing out of the same hymn book. The language is too archaic. It's too ornate. And I said, well, I'm not going to backpedal and give everybody contemporaneous voices. That would betray my vision.
But this courage of convictions thing that Paolo was talking about, that you really need, when you set out to write, if you decide that you actually are master of the